Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, it's the Ajay Bruno Show. We're back with another episode. We've got a lot of ground, space rapid to cover today. I'm proud to introduce first guest, Joseph Mallozzi. He's a former writer and executive producer for all three Stargate series, as well as a co-creator of Dark Matter. We're glad to have him on the show today. Without further ado, let's get him on the air right now. Hello,
there we go.
with us.
Hello.
Hi. Well, we got a lot to cover today. I want to get right into it. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you first get into writing professionally, and how did that lead to working on Stargate?
I was always a big reader as a kid, and I loved sci-fi, and I always figured I would be an author. Until basically, the cold reality hit me that writing prose is really hard work and doesn't really pay as much as, let's say, other writing ventures. And, I wrote a terrible novel that my Stargate writing partner, Paul Mully, read and said, this is a terrible novel, but do you ever think, it might make a good script? So basically I learned the script format, and I turned that terrible novel into an equally terrible script. But, it got me thinking. And then essentially I just got in the door. I got my foot in the door in animation. I started off writing, for children's cartoons. And eventually I developed and I story edited children's cartoons, and I moved up to, teen live action. I did a show called Student Bodies for a couple of seasons. Did some action adventure shows, and ultimately ended up on Stargate in season 4. And, my partner Paul and I landed with the understanding that the show would probably go another season and would end with its 5th and final season. So we thought, great, good experience, great credits. And of course, SG1 ended up, surpassing our expectations. And every year we thought the series would end, we kept on getting picked up until season 10, when I honestly was sure we were going to get picked up, which, as it turned out, was a kiss of death, because that was the year that the show ended. But in any case, we moved on from there to Atlantis, and then from Atlantis to Stargate Universe, then a couple of productions that I'd sooner forget, and then ultimately Dark Matter, which wrapped its 3rd and sadly final season last summer.
Yeah, well, I want to get into all of those shows. Before we start on Stargate SG-1, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about working in Canada. Do you think there's any significant differences getting involved in that field there compared to the U.S.?
Yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to make quality television. Obviously in Canada, I'm a much, I'm playing in a much smaller pond, if you will. Although, the opportunities aren't quite as big. I mean, we don't have the budgets of, let's say, the bigger network shows, in the U.S. On the other hand, there's a lot of genre television going on in Vancouver and Toronto, a lot of production, and that's because of one is the Canadian dollar. The difference of the Canadian dollar can get you somewhere between 15 to, 25%, depending on what the rate is on the exchange, and also the generous tax credits. And ultimately, if you're shooting a show with visual effects, you want to ensure that the money you have budgeted ends up on screen. And so, for that reason, Canada is very attractive. And as a kid who grew up reading Asimov and Clarke, it's just a perfect place for me to be for now. in any case. I mean, I've been very lucky. You know, as I mentioned, I was on Stargate, finished up Dark Matter, and I have a number of irons in the fire, and hopefully I'll continue in the genre. If not, then you know, I'll check out other opportunities.
Well, Dark Matter is not finished for me, but that's another story. Okay, well let's get started on SG-1. The first episode you wrote, I believe it was Window of Opportunity. That was one of my favorite episodes. I was wondering, how did that one come about? Was there any inspiration in particular for the scene where Jack hits the golf ball through the Stargate? That's one of my favorite scenes.
Okay, well, actually, the first script we wrote was actually Scorched Earth, but
it was, okay.
And actually, that's the script that actually won us the staff position. But Window of Opportunity was the first episode that actually went to camera, and the original pitch actually was much darker. It was about about the team encountering a civilization that is trying to avert a planetary extinction by continually looping back in time to try and head off the catastrophe. And ultimately, Robert Cooper, who was one of the co-creators of Atlantis and at the time was a co-showrunner of SG-1 with Brad Wright, started giving us notes and was like, well, you know, instead of, you know, it's too dark, why don't we do this and play the humor? And ultimately, I realized we're just doing Groundhog Day. And he's like, exactly. And, you know, initially my thought was, well, why do we want to really just, you know, do another Groundhog Day? And it's something I quickly realized on SG-1 in particular was the fact that, you know, there are a lot of, you know, great sci-fi chestnuts, if you will. And what makes them special is how our characters react or, you know, in the scenario. So in the case of Window of Opportunity, it's O'Neill and Teal'c, the two guys who, you know, are not scientifically grounded and can find the solution, who basically don't understand ancient, who are called upon to understand the science and speak ancient. And, you know, it was just a lot of fun. The golfing through the gate sequence that you're talking about, there's this fantastic montage in the middle where essentially they take some time off and we check in on them. You know, O'Neill, you know, doing pottery, dipping a Carter for the kiss, and of course that golf episode, that golf scene, that came about because we were actually short in the episode. We came up short by about, I think, a couple of minutes, and so Brad Wright sat down and actually wrote that montage and included the golf scene because he and the other producers were such avid golfers, and so, you know, that's how that scene came about. And it's funny to think if we wouldn't have been short, we wouldn't have gotten that amazing montage.
Sure, that makes sense. Another one, Wormhole Extreme. That was another funny episode you wrote. Could you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah. I mean, that one came about just because, you know, partly because of the kind of notes we would get, you know, on the show, and just partly because of our love for sci-fi. It's really a celebration of sci-fi and the fans. You know, there's that one instance where one of the network executives, who's actually played by a network executive, has a little cameo and says, you know what this show needs is a sexy female alien, and which was actually one of the notes that we got early in season 4 that the fans reacted to, not in a positive way. So it's, you know, just sort of our opportunity to kind of poke fun at us, and not really poke fun at the fans, but sort of celebrate fandom, because, you know, at the end of the day, like any show, it all comes down to the fans, and genre shows in general, especially shows like Sci-Fi, where at the core it's about this family unit. They really command such a passionate fan base. So, you know, nothing but respect and love for the fans in that episode.
Sure, and I think the fans were still supporting the show after 10 years, so I thought it could have kept going. I mean, the story was good when they rebooted it with the whole Ori arc, and it was a shame to see it end there.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I thought for sure. I remember being on set. I forget what we were shooting, one of the mid-season 2-parters, and I was talking to Chris Judge, and And he was like, "Oh, of course we're coming back." And we had this conversation, and I said, "Yeah, of course we're coming back. I mean, it just makes sense because we were running simultaneous productions at the time, Atlantis and SG1, and it was just it didn't dawn on me at that point. We've gotten so many 11th hour reprieves and saves and pickups that I fully expected to come back. And when we heard that we weren't coming back, of course it was very disappointing because I mean we honestly could have kept going. And as you said, we kind of revitalized things a bit with the new villain and the addition of Ben Browder and Claudia Black as two new characters. So even though like Atlantis continued, SG1 always had a special place in my heart just for the characters and the tone and the type of stories we were able to tell.
There was definitely a lot more that I liked there than I didn't. There was one episode in particular I thought was a good one, Family Ties, towards the end of the series. I thought it was weirdly placed, though. Was it always meant to be there? Because it seemed strange.
Well, yes, no. I thank you for that because that one was not a fan favorite. Because at that point, I'd finished the draft and we were actually, going to go to camera. And it was around that time that we found out about the cancellations. So the fan response, because it was a late season episode, the fans' response was, why are we wasting time on these comedic episodes, when we should be wrapping up the series? But honestly, at the time, and I was writing it, I didn't know that we were that we'd been canceled. However, in a subsequent draft before it went to camera, if you pay close attention to the episode, you will notice somewhat subtle digs and references to the cancellation. I think it opens with Cameron Mitchell coming around the corner talking to someone saying, I didn't even know the show's been canceled, and then there's Carter talking to Dr. Lee in the lab and talking about how the fact that the Stargate program doesn't get the respect it really deserves from higher ups, and there were somewhat veiled references to the fact that we've been canceled and we weren't happy about it.
No, I thought those were great. So why some fans didn't like it, I don't know, but it was a good one.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you're welcome. So General Hammond, he was really one of my favorite characters. I was wondering if you had any interesting stories about the great Don Davis.
Don was I want to say larger than life. He, grew up a Southern boy in the, Appalachians, and I got along with all of the cast members, but Don was a guy that I would hang out with. We would go for dinners. He referred to himself as a gourmand because he didn't know the intricacies and the subtleties of flavor profiles, but he liked to eat. And it was just kind of a pleasure hanging out with him. And he'd always come by the office. He was an artist as well in his spare time, and loved to sketch and I look back at him with great fondness. He it was very, very, very sad to lose him. And he was just a genuinely very nice guy. He really appreciated the fandom and really went out of his way to I think make all the fans he met at his various conventions feel very special.
Oh yeah, it was quite awful to hear that, but thanks for sharing that. So I want to pivot to Atlantis in a second. Real quick, there's something that's been on my mind with Stargate for years. I always wondered, when it was on Showtime, they had, I think, 22 episodes a season. You'd never get that on the premium cable network now. Is there any reason, in particular? No.
I don't know. It's really, I guess, just kind of the nature of the beast. The fact that I think there's kind of been this shift to the serialized format, which the shorter orders are work better for, and just in terms of being able to tell that kind of serialized storyline. But also, I think just with the proliferation of programming and the desire to sort of make the most of the money these broadcasters have, rather than commit to like 2 episodes or even 20 episodes. They're looking for maybe with less episodes. So I mean, it's more sort of a cable model. I mean, the networks for sure, they still will air their 20, 24 or so episodes a season. However, you're not going to find very much sci-fi or far future sci-fi on the networks, unfortunately.
Sure. Okay. Well, Atlantis. I'm gonna kick it off with one that really got me. I thought Dr. Beckett was a great character. So, what was behind the decision to kill him originally?
This is a great question for the writer of the script, Martin Garrow, who is presently the showrunner, creator showrunner of Blind Spot. You got to have him on your show. He is a delightful guy. Sorry. But ultimately, I don't want to speak for Martin, but I think he needed a certain amount of gravitas to counterbalance the tone or if you will, kind of the type of story that he wanted to tell in the episode Sunday, and this idea that these people go out and risk their lives every day, and there are dangers out there, but unbeknownst to them, there could be dangers in the most unexpected or most mundane of moments, and that's that's what Sunday proves. The fact that basically it's like a almost like a regular day, a downtime day for everybody, on Atlantis, and it ends in tragedy, and that last moment where Beckett appears to say goodbye to McKay, I think is rivals Daniel Jackson's goodbye to O'Neill as one of like the saddest scenes in Stargate history. I thought it was very impactful, and I know a lot of the fans didn't love it. They loved the Beckett character, and Paul McGillion is great and was great. But in order for that episode and for that message to resonate, there had to be some sort of loss. And and unfortunately, it turned out to be Dr. Beckett.
Oh yeah, that.
I mean, essentially,
that makes...
yeah. I just want to say, basically, I don't think the episode would have been as effective if it had been a lesser character. So I would put it that way.
Sure. No, it was powerful, but I guess the fans are powerful too, since they brought him back later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, in the finale that you co-wrote for Atlantis, can you give us some details about where the story would have went in that canceled Atlantis movie?
Sorry?
If the
in the finale that you co-wrote for Atlantis, can you give us some details about where that was leading into, where that would have led had the Atlantis movie that was planned actually come to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the finale was not planned as a series finale. We honestly thought we were coming back for a sixth season. And so the plan had been to, in fact, actually this was the plan that Rob Cooper pitched out. He suggested that we actually shoot the first 2 episodes of season, what would have been season 6, the opening 2-parter, at the tail end of season 5, because it would have just been cheaper, and we could have hedged our bets so that in the event that the show wasn't picked up, then we could release it as a special movie and give the fans some sort of closure. Although one could argue that the fact that Atlantis is back on Earth and looking out onto the Golden Gate Bridge is kind of a form of closure, but it kind of left too many questions unanswered, and so that's what we set out to do. And ultimately, we ended up writing the 2-parter, which became the script for Stargate Extinction, which involved the Atlantis, which is the city of Atlantis, returning to Pegasus, and encountering essentially the wormhole drive breaking down near a planet, and then going down to the planet's surface. And to be honest with you, the story that unfolds, has parallels in a later Stargate Universe episode called was it Epilogue or Common Descent, where they go down to the planet and encounter future versions of themselves or descendants. Their descendants, and that was an idea that we actually originally had for the Atlantis movie, and ultimately they, we were always big fans of sort of time travel, and so it would essentially be a time travel story, and would have ended with the city of Atlantis back in Pegasus, resuming business as usual, and much like SG-1, suggesting that the expedition was still out there rather than back on Earth. Unfortunately, we wrote the script, but the bottom fell out of the DVD market. MGM at the time was going through their own issues and decided not to pursue the movie. We ended up shelving it, moving on to Stargate Universe, and then ultimately that kind of Common Descent storyline was used in the Stargate Universe series. And so it's kind of disappointing. At one point a couple of years ago, I was approached by a comic book company that was looking to continue the one of the Stargates, either SG-1, Atlantis, or Universe. Basically, they were open to it. I think they just acquired the comic book, the licensing rights to the comic book and the characters, and approached me about writing a comic book. And my response was, well, actually, we've already got the script for the Stargate Extinction comic book. I think the fans would love to know what we had planned. And so there was talk. We went down, that road. And I think they even announced the release. And then ultimately, I think the studio changed their minds, or they went in another direction. And so that was also shelved. Mm-hmm. So again, another disappointment. But, in the end, we had plans. In fact, actually, at one point we had on my blog, I blog every day. I've been blogging every day for almost 10 years. In fact, if you check out the blog in the early years, you'll find a lot of behind-the-scenes photos and stories about my time on Stargate Atlantis. On the blog, I kind of give a breakdown on the Stargate Extinction storyline, as well as I refer to it as an AU, alternate universe, season 6 of Atlantis, where I break down some of the ideas that we were going to tackle in the show's 6th season.
Well, speaking of unresolved plot lines, let's talk a little bit about Stargate Universe. On that show, I thought Robert Carlyle was really the highlight of it. He was fantastic. The show itself, I enjoyed it. It didn't click for me quite as much as the other two, but I was wondering what the plans were for that. I know that, I forgot who said it. Someone said that the initial plan was to let it run at least 3 seasons. So.
Yeah, I mean, the plan was for obviously to go 5 seasons actually, and I get that it was a very different animal from Stargate, SG-1 and Atlantis, just tonally. The other two shows us kind of a lighter tone. It was they were more fun. Frankly, they were easier to write. Universe was a little more hard science, a little darker. Still there were some brilliant episodes. The episode Time, written by Robert Cooper, was one of my favorites. The entire Stargate canon. But Brad and Robert wanted to set out and do something different. And to be honest with you, when they went out to pitch it, they didn't want to do a Stargate show. They wanted to do something different. But, because they were known for Stargate and because Stargate was a property, they were really pushed to reimagine the show they were pitching as a Stargate, as a third Stargate incarnation, in which, is how Stargate Universe was born. And so, we went a couple of seasons, and it was a tough time for sci-fi in general. Ratings were dropping across the board. And then the fact is, as you pointed out, you were not maybe as big a fan of Stargate Universe because it was not like the Stargate you knew. And, the numbers were, kind of dropped off. But by season 2, it was looking like the show was in trouble. And we'd been told that, it's looking like we'll get an order for a third and final season, which is really, at the end of the day, more than you can ask for. I mean, I understand, if the numbers aren't working out, if it doesn't make financial sense for a network, just appreciate the fact that they will allow the fans some closure. And so we had to, near the end, we were operating under the assumption that we were going to come back for a third season. And Paul and I, my longtime writing partner, wrote that finale. And that finale just really encapsulates, for me, a lot of what Stargate was about. And I wrote that final dinner scene where they're sitting around the table and they're talking, and Eli equates them to almost like a family. And that's how I felt about SG-1, and that's how I felt about the Atlantis expedition and the universe crew, and even later when I went on to do Dark Matter, this idea that this crew is like family and that the fans tune in to check in on them like an extended family. And so Eli gives voice to that in that episode. And then in the end, Paul, was actually quite brilliant. And, he said, just in case, because stranger things have happened, and even though they say we probably will come back for a third season, in case we don't, let's bookend the series. So I'm sure you'll notice, or fans will notice, that the opening of the show starts with, these beautiful shots of the camera kind of descending, I think, through the various levels of the ship as a ship suddenly comes alive and lights up. And then, the final montage sequence at the end of the series is the opposite. We're actually going up and we're seeing the ship shut down and all the lights go out. And we end with Eli, on the observation deck, looking out hopefully at the stars, exactly where he wants to be. And then that was that, sadly.
Oh, but I remember that too. Let's get into Dark Matter here. How did the idea originally come about? I know you were working on a different project at the time, and that one fell through.
Well, actually, I've always been a big fan of villains, the bad guys, the colorful characters, and it's something I explore constantly in my writing, is this idea of redemption, and everyone has something in their past that they regret, and to various degrees, and so Dark Matter was a show that I was developing way back when I was on Stargate, and the idea being that once Stargate was over, I could roll into Dark Matter, and of course Stargate kept on getting picked up, which was nice in a way, because it, in putting off Dark Matter, it really allowed me to flesh out the characters and the backstory, so that by the time we did get that green light, I had all 5 seasons planned. I had all the story arcs for the characters planned, and it allowed me to really sort of throw out hints and kind of lay little breadcrumbs along the way as I was telling these stories. So yeah, I mean, as you said, at the time, we developed Dark Matter. It originally, actually, was a pilot script, but from my experience in animation, I knew that, original ideas are a tough sell, but everybody loves IP. Everybody loves established properties, books and comic books. So I approached Keith Goldberg at Dark Horse Comics to turn what would have been the first 2 episodes, the first 2 scripts of Dark Matter, into a 4-episode opening arc. And so Gary Brown was the artist, and he did a phenomenal job. Patrick Thorpe was our editor. It was just such an amazing experience, very different from what I'm used to writing scripts. And the comic book launched, and it was collected into a graphic novel that subsequently Jay Firestone of Prodigy Pictures went out and pitched. And one of the nice things about having the comic book is when you pitch a story, a series to a group of executives, they'll often imagine the worst possible execution of your vision. But if they have a comic book there, it's a visual aid that takes them through what you imagine, more or less. And so that comic book helped make the sale. And but it was kind of a long time coming, to be honest with you. I mean, there was a point where I assumed that another show I had developed was about to get the green light, and dark matter was dead. And then within the course of 24 hours, the show that I developed was dead, and suddenly dark matter was a go, and it was like a mad scramble to prep and get ready for production.
Sure. And once the show started, I thought one was a great character, and I heard he was forcibly written off, and he had to change some things around. What happened with that?
Yeah, I mean, the character, as it turned out, was a little more different ultimately than we had imagined on the page. I mean, I imagined him as more kind of a fish out of water, Ben Browder type from Farscape, sort of another show that I was a huge fan of. But, we made adjustments as sort of time went on, and then ultimately, as we, prepared for season 2, you'll always get, input, creative input, and you pick and choose your battles, and one of the big asks for season 2 was to shake things up and kill off a major character, and specifically the one character, and it, ultimately, he was a character that I actually wanted to have stick around. I'm a huge fan of Mark Ben David, and I still think he was great in the role. But ultimately, they wanted to change, and it was not a battle that I was prepared or was in a position to fight at that time. And so, ultimately, I acquiesced because I felt it was always possible to bring back the Jace Corso character as well. So even though we would be killing off one, there was a possibility of Mark coming back to the show. And also, I mean, I had an idea for a way to bring the one character back. One of the nice things about science fiction is, as we used to tell people all the time on Stargate when we killed off the characters, is that no one ever really dies in science fiction. So, I did have a plan in my back pocket for Dark Matter's 4th season to bring the one character back. But sadly it never came to fruition, and the series ended there with that 3rd season cliffhanger with androids and aliens and the promise of so much sci-fi goodness.
No, well, I was wondering too, is there any chance we'll have like a Farscape type miniseries conclusion? I mean, that show was dead and they brought it back, so.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of hold out hope, but just the way things went, leading up to the official cancellation and the fallout afterwards, I don't think so. I mean, I heard that, we were on the bubble, but I was fairly confident because, if you look back at those the Sci-Fi slate for 2017, we were one of their most watched shows still. Even though they didn't own us, we didn't cost a lot, certainly in comparison to a lot of their originals. And like I said, I mean, they're the Sci-Fi channel. Presumably they love sci-fi, and you can't get much more sci-fi than an android uprising and an alien invasion. And when I heard we were on the bubble, I sort of reached out and said, "Hey, maybe we could, we can find a way to maybe trim the licensing fee and maybe not make it even less expensive for you." And they were like, "No." And I was like, "Well, can we at least talk about maybe a calling it a 4th and final season, and I can collapse my plans for seasons 4 and 5 and give the fans some sort of closure." And they're like, "No." And then they announced a cancellation, and we followed up with a request for maybe a wrap-up movie for the fans, and frankly never heard back, which was a bit surprising, or maybe not. I don't know. So the fact how things kind of went down in the end. I'll be honest, and I have been honest online, it kind of left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, considering, I did the math. I've produced 279 hours of science fiction for the channel, and would have been nice to get a response at the very least.
No, that's really unfortunate. Especially for a channel that has so many good shows over the years, they've been prematurely canceling quite a few of them, and even when they're profitable, I don't understand that.
Yeah. I mean, how you measure profitability. I mean, I don't know. And like I said, I've been on the receiving ends of cancellations before, and I get it. It's a business decision. However, I thought Dark Matter was kind of a unique case where, I've mentioned this before, where I think, when you put a show on the air, you enter into an unspoken agreement with your audience that if they tune in, you'll continue to support their show. And our fans did tune in. And in the end, the show was not supported. And like I said, I mean, I get it. I just thought, at the end of the day, whatever. I mean, after 17 seasons on Stargate, 3 seasons of Dark Matter, and various other projects, my dogs are not going to starve. It's frustrating to not be able to finish the story I had planned. But really, my response was more disappointment, and I was frankly a little peeved, not really so much for myself, but for the cast and crew who worked really hard, and for fandom who frankly supported the show. And, I wrote in my blog when I announced the cancellation, you guys deserve better, and they did.
No, I definitely agree. I know we're running a little long here. I got a couple last questions here.
Sure.
Lastly, on Dark Matter, I'm nitpicking here, but it drove me crazy how 600 years in the future they have modern day computer monitors in their quarters. Is there any reason besides? No, just logistics.
In fact, actually, that was going to be part of the Android Rebellion storyline, and we're going to essentially get into the backstory of sort of the technology of the time and the fact, like you say, we're, presumably hundreds of years into the future, and yet we're still using certain, traditional, if you will, technology, and the idea that in an attempt to forestall the singularity, essentially, the rise of artificial intelligence, the authorities purposely, put the brakes on certain aspects of technology. And so to account for sort of the, obviously, kind of the dichotomy of something like the holographic imagery and the more, old style, computers and such in the ships. Again, it would really ultimately depend on what kind of a ship it was, or what kind of a location it was, and who was behind, the specific technology. So that was kind of something I wanted to get into and kind of prepare, provide a few answers for in the Android storyline, but again, never really got the chance to.
Sure. And do you have any thoughts on the web series MGM is doing? I'm not sure exactly how much they're putting into this.
No, I mean, I wish them luck. There's a special place in my heart for Stargate and the Stargate fandom, and everyone is flocking now to streaming platforms. So this is their attempt to establish a streaming platform, engage fan reaction, sort of like CBS has done with their platform, and really, I hope it works out for them. They're testing it with this web series, but I've heard rumors that they would look to relaunch a Stargate series, but they're faced with a dilemma. On the one hand, I think they want to do something new and strike out in an all new direction, which is great. But on the other hand, I think the fan base that exists, grew up with those TV shows, and no matter what direction they take, I think rather than wiping the slate clean with a reboot, I think it would be really in their best interests to establish a show within kind of the universe that was created, that SG-1 and Atlantis and even universe, existed in, so that, there's a possibility of some sort of like even a minimal crossover. Maybe a character shows up in an episode here or there to, sort of pay tribute to what came before. Because like I said, that existing fandom is so passionate and very much still out there.
Sure, it'd be nice if they did something like that. I know they were talking about possibly continuing the original movie and making that into a series. That died down too. So,
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sure. Finally, I know you have some projects coming up. Are there any you want to mention in particular? I think there was a superhero one. So.
Well, to be honest with you, I've got almost like a dozen things on the go in various stages of development. Certainly one of the more developed is that Masked anthology you mentioned. It was an anthology of superhero fiction that I contributed to way back in, I think, 2010 or 2012, edited by Lou Anders, and, includes stories by a lot of, big comic book heavyweights like Gail Simone and Marjorie Liu and Paul Cornell. And the idea is to set it up as an anthology series, somewhat like Black Mirror, except instead of the focus on technology, the focus is on these super abilities. But I mean, like Black Mirror, even though the focus is on technology, it's really the story. It focuses on the characters and how they react and respond to the technology, and that's kind of the same thing we want to do with Masked, and how having superpowers affects people, regular people, in good and bad ways. And so we're out and pitching that one, and I'm developing a couple of other sci-fi properties. I've got a couple of sci-fi pitches out. One of them, I described in my blog as sort of a spiritual successor to Dark Matter, and waiting to hear word about that. Actually, I'm writing a script for a broadcaster. I was asked to develop this, and this is a little more, a little darker in many ways. And very different from any sci-fi that I've done before. And then, just there, a lot of adaptations. I'm a huge reader, and so I've been approached about adapting a sci-fi book, a couple of horror novels, which is kind of interesting, and even taking a look at some, anime and Korean shows that I'm a fan of as well, and maybe looking to adapt them to to a North American series format. So, a lot on the go, but at the end of the day, you don't know in this business. You got to hedge your bets because, like as was the case with Dark Matter, just when you think something's going to go, it's not. On the other hand, things that you may seem like long shots will suddenly get the green light. So cover your bases.
Sure. Well, I hope to see some of these projects in the air soon, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
That was Joseph Mallozzi. Great to have him on the show. We'll be having some new episodes soon, too. There's some guests to announce as well. Be sure to check out his blog. And once again, this has been the Ajay Bruno Show. See you next time.